In this video, we are going to discuss the second chapter of the Environment and Ecology, that is Ecosystem. Here, we will brush up some definition which can be potential question in the exam. Then we shall discuss energy pyramids, then ecological succession, and finally we will deal with nutrient cycles, that is carbon cycle and phosphorus cycle. Now take your pen and paper and follow along with me. Take running notes and revise those notes again. Talking about the ecosystem in simpler words, an ecosystem is where living organisms live together and interact with each other. It is simple, right? Let us add on with a better definition. We can say that the ecosystem is when biotic and abiotic components have a well stable physical environment and interact with each other. Biotic means living things and abiotic means non-living things. For example, if your classroom is an ecosystem, you and your friends are the biotic components and the benches, duster, chalk are the abiotic components. Now, an ecosystem can be a small pond or a whole forest, or the whole of the earth is also considered as an ecosystem. To study the ecosystem more clearly, we define the ecosystem into two major categories: terrestrial and aquatic. Forest, deserts, and grasslands are terrestrial ecosystems, and ponds, lakes, rivers are all aquatic ecosystems. It is simple. An ecosystem based on water is aquatic, and if it is based on land, then it is terrestrial one. Moving on, let's get to know about a new term, and that is stratification. Now in an ecosystem, there are many species of organisms, right? So for a more clear study, we distribute different species on different levels, arranged vertically. Taking an example, a tree would be arranged on the topmost level, the next would be shrubs and the herbs, and grass would be on the lowermost level. The next thing we need to learn about is the factors due to which all the components of the ecosystem work as a single unit. So what is it that binds them together? Their needs and requirements are right. They all must have some dependency on each other, due to which all of them are staying together. Don't you think so? That binding factor is productivity. Now productivity here refers to production. The rate of biomass production is called productivity. Talking about production, let's define primary production. Primary production is referred to as the total amount of biomass produced by the producers. That is, here the process of production is fast and it occurs in photosynthesis. Producers are where the photosynthesis occurs. These are the plants, for example. But when consumers produce the organic matter, it is called secondary productivity. It occurs on herbivores and omnivores. Now you may ask, what is biomass? Biomass is nothing but organic matter. Also, every component of the ecosystem requires sunlight or solar energy as a basic requirement. Now how does productivity relate to solar power? For that, let me tell you what is gross primary productivity. In an ecosystem, it is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. And for photosynthesis, we again require solar energy. So it makes sense now, right? Better. Last but not the least, important term under this topic is net primary productivity. The name may sound complicated, but indeed is a really simple thing. If we go by the bookish definition, net primary productivity, that is NPP, is gross primary productivity minus the respiratory losses. Like in economy, gross means the total or whole amount of something, whereas net means what remains from the whole after certain deductions are made. For example, NDP, that is net domestic product, is equal to GDP, that is gross domestic product minus depreciation from capital goods. So net primary productivity is equal to gross primary productivity minus the respiratory losses. So the next factor which binds an ecosystem is decomposition. You may ask, how decomposition? Before moving on, let me tell you some basic terms so we can understand decomposition better. First is a producer. Organisms that produce their own food and nutritional requirements are producers. For example, plants. Then comes the consumer. Organisms feeding on the producers and consuming the food made by the producer, or they consume the producers themselves. These are the consumers. And then comes the decomposers, which decompose both the producer and the consumers. Decomposers are mainly fungi and bacteria. They break down complex organic matter into a simple form using enzymes. The next important term to be learned is detritus. Detritus is dead organic matter. Dead plant remains such as leaves, flowers, bark along with animal decay matter constitute the detritus. Those who eat detritus are called detritivores. They break down detritus into smaller particles by the process called fragmentation. Earthworm is a detritivore. Just remember this, those who eat detritus are detritivores, and detritus is a dead organic matter. Whereas decomposers decompose complex organic matter with the help of enzymes. Now steps involved in decomposition. Number 1. Fragmentation. Breaking down of detritus, that is dead plant and animal remains and fecal matter into smaller particles by detritivores or decomposers. Second, leaching. It is a process by which these inorganic matters enter the soil. Next is catabolism. Process by which detritus is degraded into simpler inorganic substances by bacterial and fungal enzymes. Next is humification. Accumulation of humus in the soil. That is, humus is resistant to microbial action and decomposes at an extremely slow rate. It acts as a reservoir of nutrients. And finally, the mineralization, process by which humus further degrades to release minerals into the soil. It is an oxygen consuming process and is controlled by the chemical composition of detritus and climatic conditions. The next very important factor is energy flow. Sun is the sole source of energy for all the ecosystem on the earth. Plants and other photosynthetic organisms utilize less than 50% of the solar radiation known as photosynthetically active radiation, PAR. In an ecosystem, plants are called producers and all animals depend upon the plants directly or indirectly for their food. Hence, they are known as consumers or heterotrophs. The consumers can be further divided into primary consumers, that is herbivores, secondary consumers or primary carnivores, and tertiary consumers, that is secondary carnivores. Now, what is trophic level? Every organism occupies a specific level in their food chain known as the trophic level. Usually the first trophic level is occupied by plants, second by primary consumers, and so on. Now, what is standing crop? Each trophic level contains a certain amount of living material at a specific time known as the standing crop. The number of trophic levels in a food chain is restricted since the energy transfer follows the 10% law. That is, only 10% of the energy is transferred from a lower trophic level to higher one. Now, energy pyramids. The energy relationship between the different trophic level is represented by the ecological pyramids. Their base represents the producers or the first trophic level, while the apex represents the tertiary or top level consumer. Ecological pyramids are of three types: pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. In most ecosystems, the three pyramids are upright, except in some cases. The pyramid of biomass is inverted in an ocean ecosystem since a small standing crop of phytoplankton supports a large number of zooplankton. In that case, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. Also, the pyramid of numbers can be inverted when Say a large tree is eaten by small insects. However, the pyramid of energy is always upright. Remember this. Is always upright. Remember this. This can be a potential question. The pyramid of energy is always upright. A trophic level represents a functional level and not a single species as such. Also, a single species may become a part of more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time, depending upon the role it plays in the ecosystem. Now there are some limitations of ecological pyramids. The ecological pyramid do not take into account the same species belonging to more than one trophic level. It assumes a simple food chain that rarely exists in nature. In nature, we find food webs. So, the ecological pyramids do not explain food webs. Saprophytes are not given a place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. Saprophytes are fungus or microorganism that lives on dead or decaying organic matter. Now let us discuss the next important concept, ecological succession. Now if we talk about a living system, there will be changes too. These changes lead to ecological successions. By definition, the gradual and fairly predictable change in the species composition of a given area is called ecological succession. Now these changes lead finally to a community that is near equilibrium with the environment, that is known as climax community. Talking about communities, there exists an essential community called the pioneer community, which invades a bare area. Pioneer species are hardy species that are the first to colonize previously disrupted or damaged ecosystems, beginning a chain of ecological succession that ultimately leads to a more biodiverse, steady-state ecosystem. Example, bacteria, fungi, or lichens. And talking about successions, let us get to know more about the two main types of successions: primary succession and secondary succession. Succession is a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there. These areas where no living organisms ever existed, say bare rock, lost all the living organisms that existed. The former is called primary succession. Now once we know what ecological succession is, we will understand what a seer is. A seral community is an intermediate state found in ecological succession in an ecosystem, advancing towards its climax community. Explanation to this is a seral community, also known as seer, is the name given to each group of plants with the succession. In many cases, more than one seral stage evolves until climax conditions are attained. These are transitory plant communities. Depending upon the substrate and climate, a seral community can be one of the following: hydroseer, a community in the water; lithoseer, a community on rocks; zamoseer, a community on sand; xeroseer, a community in a dry area; and haloseer, community in a saline area, example marsh. If the succession takes place in wet area, it is hydrarch succession. If it takes place in dry areas, it is xerarch succession. Before moving further, it is important to know about food web and the food chain. Food chain is a single straight chain of organisms from the producer to the final consumer, whereas different interconnected food chains are called food web. A food chain outlines who eats whom. A food web is all of the food chains in an ecosystem. In nature, we hardly find a food chain, we mostly find a food web. Now let us talk about a very important thing, that is the nutrient cycle. We very well know that all organisms need a constant supply of nutrients to grow, reproduce, and perform various body functions. The fact is this: nutrients are never lost in nature. they are always recycled. These nutrient cycles are also called biogeochemical cycles. Nutrient cycles are of two types, gaseous and sedimentary. Now, what are gaseous cycles? Here, reservoirs of these types of cycles exist in the atmosphere. For example, carbon cycle is example of gaseous cycle. The next is sedimentary cycle. Reservoirs of these type of cycles exist in the Earth's crust. For example, phosphorus cycle. The first cycle that we are learning in this chapter is carbon cycle. About 49% of the dry weight of living organism is made up of carbon. The ocean reserves and fossil fuels regulate the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere for photosynthesis, of which a certain amount is released back through respiratory activities. A major amount of CO2 is contributed by the decomposers who contribute to the CO2 pool by processing dead and decaying matter. Decomposers that we learned earlier secrete enzymes and transfer complex organic matter into the simple organic matter. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been increased considerably by human activities such as burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, and it has detrimental effects of which we will learn about in the chapter of environmental issues. The next important cycle that we are going to learn is phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is an important constituent in our DNA, cell membranes and nucleic acids, and cellular energy transfer system. Rocks contain phosphorus in the form of phosphate. When rocks are weathered, some of the phosphates get dissolved in the soil solution and are absorbed by plants. Consumers get their phosphorus from plants. Phosphorus returns back to the soil by the action of phosphate solubilizing microbes (PSMs) on dead organisms. Some important PSM, that is phosphate solubilizing microbes, are Pseudomonas, Bacillus, Micrococcus, Aspergillus, Fusarium, etc. in soil. So this is it from the chapter of ecosystem. I hope you find this video interesting. If you have any doubts, please comment below in the comment section. Thank you.